also call out, I have placed a link to a file in the chat window for making maps with ArcGIS Online. And that is a guide basically to the session we're going to go through today that you could refer to later. You're welcome to open it up and follow along. I'm going to be following along on my copy, and we'll just basically work through that document to show you some very simple examples of what you can do with ArcGIS Online. Now, I will say that sometimes it is a little bit confusing when people talk about ArcGIS because it actually encompasses a lot of different tools. And there are desktop applications that run in Windows that allow, that I would call them a fully grown geographic information system. The tool we're going to talk about today is called ArcGIS Online, and this is a browser-based geographic information system. And so it basically does not require you to install software, but allows you to use your browser as a window into an online or cloud-based geographic information system. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Sorry about that, folks. So if you guys would, I'm going to ask you to follow along in the session today. So you'll be doing things on your system while I do things on mine. And if you can possibly handle that sort of juggling of the windows. So if you would open up your browser, and then you'll be able to visit Woostel. Sorry, I need to pull my screen down. woostel.maps.arcgis.com. So it's the address at the top of my browser. And if you would visit that address, you'll get to this login screen. And this will sign you into ArcGIS Online. And the way we have our site license configured is if you use your Woostel key to log in, you'll be able to log in automatically without already having an account. If you do have an ArcGIS Online account, you should be able to sign in using whatever credentials you use to set that account up. Once you get to this screen, if you click on Washington University, it should pop up a window for you to add your Woostel key credentials, and you'll be able to log in then. And I'm showing an example here of this. I'm going to actually use a different method of logging in because I have a different account. If you have any trouble logging in, please let me or Doris know about that, and we'll help you out. The ubiquitous sign-in process is, of course, always required. Sorry about this. Okay. So you guys should be seeing my browser now. And this is the home screen for the ArcGIS Online environment. And so you'll see there's some menus along the top: home, gallery, map, scene, notebook, and so forth. You'll also see on the far right, there's an icon for myself, and you will have one as well for your profile. If you would just take a moment and click on that profile or click on that icon and then visit the My Profile link. It'll give you a link to the My Profile page, which basically shows my content here. You guys will not have a lot of that, but you can also edit your bio. And so if you would make sure that your username is reflects your own name, and then in the bio, if you would click on the little pencil to edit that, and you could add HDW Workshop 2020. And then just save that. And then you can return to your home screen. Now, the link that we're going to use most today is this map page, and this allows you to get to the spot where we're going to begin doing map development. So click on that, and we'll open up a new page where we can design our online interactive maps. So there's a detailed panel on the left-hand side of the screen. It basically includes several about, content, and legend icons at the top that change what appears in the area below that. When you first initially open up one of these maps, you'll see make your own map here and some instructions, very basic instructions on how to actually add data and create your online map. We're going to be doing this, working through this together in this session. But the first thing we're going to want to do is actually save our map. So if you look at the icons along the top of the map bar, there is a save option. If you click on that, you'll be able to save this map. And the save box will open up a window that will allow you to title your map and add some tags, and also to store it in a particular folder. So I'm just going to title mine HDW Workshop 2020, and I'll add some tags, in this case HDW and BW and demo. These are tags that I use. You would be able to add your own tags and use something that makes sense to you. It basically allows you to search for these items later. So if you had specific projects that you were working on, you may want to use the same key, the same tag for all of the items associated with that. There is an option for summary that would allow you to add a description of the map, but that is optional. And then you can save this in a folder. Most of you, if you're new to ArcGIS Online, you won't have any folder options. I have several, and if we have time at the end of the session, I'll talk to you about how you would set that. But right now I'm saving this into interactive mapping workshop development for myself. So I'll save that map, and you can save that as well. Now, one thing to realize is that ArcGIS Online does not have an autosave function. So you're going to want to save your map regularly throughout the course of your session. Anytime you make some major changes to the map, you'll want to come up to the save button and just give it a click to save that map. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do is add some content. The icons along the top of this display tab on the left, if you mouse over them, it shows a little text tip that'll help you understand what those icons are doing. If you click on the content link, the only thing in our map right now is our topographic base map, and we'll talk about base maps near the end of the session. But the first thing we want to do is actually add some content that we can work with. So if you go to the add button at the top of the screen, and then we're going to search for layers. And that's going to bring up a set of locations where we can search, and we're going to search from the ArcGIS Online collection. Now that the options are available under My Content, you're going to want to scroll down and click ArcGIS Online. Now, ArcGIS Online, well, actually, let me explain here. The first few items here, my content, my favorites, my groups, and my organizations, these are all content that's local to your account or to the Washington University organizational online account. The Living Atlas and ArcGIS Online are two cloud-based sources of data that basically provide a mechanism for people to share data widely. The Living Atlas is a curated set of data managed by ESRI and basically gives you reliable, authoritative content that you can use in your maps. When you search ArcGIS Online, you're also going to be searching the Living Atlas, and so we're going to use that option today. So click on ArcGIS Online. And now we're going to use several search terms to add layers from here. So first of all, let's search on ACS population variables.
Bill, quick question.
Yes.
Should people choose the map viewer beta? if given the option?
Actually, let's not. The beta version of Map Viewer is a bit different than what I'm using today. And because of the fact that it's listed as a beta version, I'm not sure it's ready for prime time. At some point, and this is a point that I should mention here, with an online or cloud-based, browser-based application like ArcGIS Online, the platform will change over time. So don't be shocked if the next time you come into ArcGIS Online, there are either more tools available or the appearance is a little bit different. At some point, the standard browser, the map browser that we're using, will be superseded by the beta version that they're testing now. And so at some point, that will be the version you use no matter what. Just keep an open mind and realize that they make improvements to the environment on a regular basis. And so just remember to be flexible when you come in and use this tool. So right now I want to search on ACS population variables. And once you type that in, you can click return, and it's going to search using those terms in the ArcGIS Online collection. ACS stands for American Community Survey, and these are census data population variables that have been shared through the ArcGIS Online environment. Now, below that, you'll see the various returned hits from this search of the collection. And you can scroll down and you'll see that in each case there's a little thumbnail describing it. There's a link for the item details. There's an indicator for the type of content that this is. And if you mouse over the icon, in this case, it's showing that this is a feature layer shared by ESRI. It also shows an updated, a date of update, and then a couple of icons below that show you that this is recommended as authoritative content by Esri, and it's also part of the Living Atlas. So if you mouse over those icons, you'll get a sense for this type of content. Now, in order to use, or when you use content from ArcGIS Online, you should evaluate that content to understand who is sharing it and how authoritative it is. Anytime it's listed with this Living Atlas icon, you can pretty much be confident that it is a source from an authoritative source and is basically useful for your purposes. If you click on, I'm just looking at the first couple of returns here, ACS population variables boundaries, and I'm going to click on the thumbnail, and it opens up a new window that shows you more details about that layer. Not only do you get the information that's included in the little pop-up window, but you also get more details about how this layer contains the most current release of data from the American Community Survey. And then there's lots of other information there so that you can accurately evaluate what the information is and whether or not you want to include that in your map. Now, I've evaluated these sources already, and I know that I want to include the boundaries and the centroid values for this layer. So I can either use the Add to Map button here at the bottom, which I'll do. I'll click that, and it's going to add that to my map. And I'm going to use the X box at the top of that window to close it. Then for the next one, I want to include this ACS population variable centroids as well. And there's a plus sign down here at the bottom right that allows me to just go ahead and add that content to my map. So I'm going to do that. And so that gives me an area-based layer and a point-based layer. And I also want to do some examples with a line-based layer. So if you would highlight the search terms at the top of the window and just type in California railroads, or I'm sorry, California scenic highways. And that's going to bring up a California scenic highway layer that was shared by mholt7_GIS and data. And if we were to evaluate this, we would find that this is a California Department of Transportation layer that has been shared by this user. And so I want to add that to my map as well. And so I'll click the plus sign there. and we'll see some line features appear in California corresponding to the scenic highways in the state of California. Now that's all the content that I want to add at the moment. We'll come back and add some more later. But if you use the left-hand arrow at the top of the add data window, it will return us to the contents display in that tab on the left. And you'll see that there are several layers that have been added to my map. California Scenic Highways is the last layer. It's showing up on top. And the thing to realize about this list of layers is that it draws from the bottom up. So the bottom layer is our topographic base map layer. Above that, I've got ACS population variables, and you see that it's added 3 boundary layers, and then 3 centroid layers, and then the California Scenic Highway layer. So I'm going to zoom into my map, and I'm just going to use my scroll wheel to drag forward to bring in a little bit more information. And you'll see what happens in my table of contents is that changes. Several of the layers are now shown in gray, whereas others are shown in more normal text. And that's because these layers are scale dependent. And so they're only visible at certain zoom scales. And we're going to talk a little bit about working with each of these layers. Excuse me. I have to keep populating with coffee to keep going here. So let's take, for example, this ACS population variables layer. I'm going to mouse over that layer, and you'll see underneath the layer name, there are several icons listed there. And each one of those corresponds to some controls for that particular layer. The reason that some of these are grayed out is because of the zoom level or the map extent that I've zoomed into in my screen. But the icons below the layer name allow you to look at various aspects of that. And if you mouse over them, each one will show in turn what they correspond to. So the one on the left is show legend, and that basically toggles on and off below the layer an indication of how that layer is symbolized. And so I'm going to just turn that on and off. Then beside that is basically a tabular icon that shows the attribute table. And if you're not familiar with GIS data sets, I'm going to pause here for a moment and talk about that. So the attribute table corresponds to each one of the features that are shown on my map. And in this case, the centroid layer is showing the centroid of the census tract. And that's what these point layers are. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my boundary layers. The checkbox in the table of contents allows me to turn things on and off. And I'm going to turn off the scenic highways also. So the only thing I can see right now are my centroid layers. And as you can see, they're represented by point values. So for each census tract in my data set, there is a point location represented there. And in the table showing my census tract features, each line or item record in that table corresponds to one of the points on the map. And each one of the columns in this table corresponds to an attribute value that's associated with that data layer. And so here at the beginning of the table, we see various housekeeping type features where the FIPS code, which uniquely identifies each census tract, the area of that tract, how much of that tract is covered by water. There's a name field, state, county, and if you scroll to the right, you'll see there are other quantitative variables that are also associated with this. And our tract layer is currently symbolized on the total population value for each one of the census tracts. And the darker the color of the symbol, that corresponds to higher numbers. And the size of the symbol is also scaled based on the population values in that census tract. So the table gives you a view for the various attributes that could be used to symbolize this layer. And as I said, in this case, it's symbolized on total population. So I'm going to go back to my centroid layer, and you can see the show table option now shows that red X, and basically clicking on that again turns that table off. Now I'll go through the other icons and we'll come back to some of these in turn, but the change style option allows you to change the symbology that's applied to these points. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Next to that, there is a filter layer, which allows us to pick and choose using attribute values, which of our features are shown on the map. We'll come back to another example of that later. Next door to that, there's a cluster points option. We're not going to talk about that today, nor the perform analysis option. Those are more advanced functions of the platform that we don't have time to get into today. I also want you to click on the more options ellipsis at the far right. That's the 3 dots there. And that opens up a contextual menu that's based on the type of layer that we're viewing at this time. And so there are various options associated with that layer here. And we'll talk about a few of those as we go. So first of all, let's go back to the symbology settings. So if you click on the change style option, that's going to bring up another pop-up menu on the left-hand side that allows you to change the settings that are used for symbology for this particular layer. So because this is a point layer, we are able to select attributes to show, and we can change our drawing style. And in this case, I've got a couple of different styles assigned to this point. First, we have a color and size option. Our color and size are both assigned to this. And in the top menu, the number 1 option, we get to choose the attribute value that's being shown. And in this case, it's presenting population independent age groups, and this is focusing on 18 and 25 plus. So it's giving us a percent population variable. And then it also has another attribute also associated with that, which is the same variable. Now in our drawing style, we can set our options here, and that allows us to use color or counts and amounts based on color, or counts and amounts based on size. And we're actually applying both of those in this setting. So we've got counts and amounts based on colors. If you click on the options there, as you dive into this, it brings up more menus that allow you to control these settings. And mine's taking a moment to reload here. So I'm going to pause here and let that load. While I'm waiting, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to cover at the moment? And Doris, is there anything in the chat box I need to address?
Nothing. I'm just answering a question about other ways to search. One way you can search is by tags, and you can do that within your organization along with the Living Atlas. So I provided a screenshot just to see how you could do that just within your organization.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, and I will point out the content that we're working with today is well suited for a workshop like this that has a short time frame, and it's dealing with content that has been shared through the ArcGIS Online environment. There are other ways to get data into your maps. Some of those include basically dragging and dropping CSV files that contain locational attributes into your map. And so if you had a series of points that you had stored in a CSV file or an Excel spreadsheet that had latitude and longitude values stored in the table, or say another locational variable like a zip code or an address field, you can bring those variables or bring those features into your map and display them on the map based on those locational variables. It's unlikely we'll get to that particular step today, but keep in mind that adding features and other layers to the ArcGIS Online environment is certainly possible. And at the end of the session, I'll talk about how you can access online resources to learn how to handle these other methods of adding features to your map. So now the change style window has now completed, and you can see that I've got a set of tools that allow me to control the dividing points that are set up for my legend. So I've got breakpoints in here. These are defined based on natural breaks, which is the standard, but you can actually also define these manually, and you can also use different types of classification schemes to divide your symbolic points. If you change the symbol by clicking on that option, you can change the fill and outline parameters using these simple boxes where, if you wanted to change the color, you can just apply that. You can also establish transparency settings here in the symbol settings. There's also ways to change the overall transparency value and the visible range. And we'll talk about visible range here in a moment when we look at it, another way to set that variable. So you would be able to make certain changes here. With most of these windows, the changes that you make are only applied when you click the OK button at the bottom to apply those changes. And then there's an arrow, there's a done button for this window, and then an arrow to return back to the main menu. And now we should see that associated with our centroid values. So that's how you change symbology. The other thing that you should understand is as we change our visibility or our view extent, so if I'm zooming in, at some point we're going to get to a point where we're going to switch from the centroid layer that's visible now to this other centroid layer. And I'm just going to keep zooming in until that happens. At some point, you get to a view extent where instead of showing, in this case, I believe it's visualizing on tracts. I'm not sure why we're not changing here. Actually, let's zoom out a little bit. There we go. And so now we've gotten zoomed out to the point where instead of visualizing by tract layer, I'm now visualizing, in this case, by states. I'm going to zoom back in a bit to the point where we're now visualizing by county. And as you can see in the table of contents on the left, we have a new layer that is highlighted or active, and the other layers are now grayed out. So this is the scale dependency that I was talking about. And if you expand the ellipsis, the more options, there is a transparency and set visibility range options here at the top. And so if you look at the set visibility range, it shows you several things. First of all, this shows the minimum and maximum view extents associated with these open arrows. The one on the left-hand side is the maximum extent. The one on the left or the right-hand side is the minimum extent. And then the black arrow that you see is the current map scale. And so this allows you to set, for instance, an appropriate view extent for the type of data that you're showing. In this case, we're showing centroids of counties. If we zoom back in a little bit further, we'll begin to see, and let me close that pop-up. We'll get to pop-ups here in a moment. I clicked on one of the variables or one of the items, and it triggers a pop-up window that we'll talk about in a minute. But so as you zoom in, and I'm gonna show you the visibility range on this tract layer, you can see now that the black arrow indicating the current map scale is now down below the county level. And this is the level that which most of these layers are visible. I'm going to just change this slider bar. So I'm grabbing the maximum value and just sliding it down to the so-called cities range. And you can see this drop down here on the left shows you the maximum view extent, and it's now highlighting this cities range. So I'll leave that, and then I'm going to go back to my table of contents and my county layer, and I'm going to set its visible range and move its minimum value down to the cities range. And so that will coincide with the range for the other layer, and I can close that now. And now I should be seeing my counties visible. And that's not changing for some reason. There are several places where you can alter this visibility range. And sometimes there is a bit of a lag between our map and changes that we make in the table of contents. So now you can see that the county level points are visible at a lower level. And as I zoom in, at some point I'll get to the so-called cities extent, and we'll switch from the county display to the centroid of the census tracts. And now we've switched over in the table of contents, and there must be just very few census tracts down here in this rural area. I'm going to zoom back out and get back to a more populated city like the city of St. Louis. And this example will make a little bit more sense as we zoom in. And now we can see our census tract variables are showing up. And if we were to activate our boundaries level, those census tract boundaries will show up underneath our points. So this is how we can change the visibility range. Other things that we can change in our table of contents are the order in which our layers appear. And I'm going to use the scenic highways layer as an example here. So I will activate that highway level, and then I'm going to use the more options and zoom to selection to zoom to the California area. Zoom to basically tells the ArcGIS Online to change your map extent to show you all of the features in the layer in which you're zooming to. So in this case, we zoomed to California. We can see our highway layers, and these layers are appearing on top of my point layer and on top of any boundary level layer that I would have activated. In this case, I've activated the census county level, and it's taken a moment to redraw, so I'll let that continue. Did any questions come up while we were working, Doris?
No.
Okay, good. So now that it's redrawn, you can see that the polygons are on the bottom, centroid points on top of those, and then on top of those are the scenic highway layers, which is a line feature basically. And I'm expanding the legend here in the table of contents to show you that line feature. Now I can change the order of these things in two different ways. First of all, in the more options menu, there is an option to move this item down, and that will move it down below the next lower layer in the table of contents. But I could also take this layer and move it down manually using the ellipsis at the left-hand side, which allows me to click and drag that item. And so I'm going to drag it down below the point layers, and then above it, where it will be above the boundary layers, but below the centroid points. And so you can see here, you can carefully control the position of your layers in the table of contents, and that thus controls their visibility in the map. The other thing that you can control is transparency. And if, for instance, we wanted these centroid layers to be a little bit transparent, under more options, there is a transparency option that allows me to change the overall transparency. And you can see immediately the impact of that on my map, as you can see through those points, and you'll be able to see the line features lining up below them. Sometimes this is valuable if you want to allow your user to see through some items on top of other items to reveal things below. So we've talked about transparency and visibility range. Now let's talk about filtering. So I'm going to turn off several of my layers so that we can focus on the polygon layers. And let's say, for instance, we were interested in looking at counties that have populations above 1 million people. And so I can use the filter option for that. And if you mouse over the filter icon and activate it, it's going to bring up a menu that allows you to create a attribute query on the layer based on the drop-down menu on the left shows you all of the quantitative variables that are in my layer. And let's see, I'm going to go down near the bottom. There is a total population variable. And so I want to filter this layer on total population that is greater than, and then I'm going to use a million, and I'll just enter that value here. So then I'm going to apply that filter, and now it should only show me counties on my map that have a population of 1 million or greater. So this is very, very valuable if you wanted to highlight some of the layers or some of the features on the map and not show others. Now, in some cases, you may want to also show the county boundaries, and there's a way to do that in that you could actually copy a layer. I'm going to do that, and that makes a new copy of my boundary layer. I'm going to drag this layer downwards, down below the other boundary layer. And then I could just simply change the symbology. And this may take a longer moment than I actually want to spend on this one, but you can change the symbology on this so that instead of this symbol, I'm just going to show the outline. So I want no fill. We can just make that fill transparent. And actually, I'm going to make the outline non-transparent and black. Click OK there. And then I need to go back and change my filter and remove the filter that I placed on the other layer before I made the copy. And I might need to make some more adjustments to the symbology, but I don't want to do that at the moment. Keep in mind that one layer is showing my features that are greater than 1 million, and the other layer is showing all of the features. And so this would allow me to, using a single data layer, allow me to call out 2 different aspects of that various layers. So I could show the boundaries with one layer, and I could show the highlighted or areas of interest with a different layer. I'm going to turn that off for now. And then there was some interest in showing georeferenced maps. And so I want to show how to take care of that. So let's go back to the Add Data menu and go down to Search for Layers. And we'll search ArcGIS Online again, but I'm going to use the clear button here. And then I'm going to type in Pittsburgh and 1872. Because I know there is a georeferenced map of Pittsburgh that's available through the Living Atlas, and I want to add that to my map. So I'll just click the plus symbol here to add that item to the map, and it's going to zoom in to that particular layer. So I'll return to my table of contents, and I'm going to turn off the other variables that I've got associated with this layer or with this map. And you can see barely around Pittsburgh, there's an individual map shown there. And as I zoom in, it actually draws the larger map so that you can see, and this is set to a visibility range. And there's some issues with the tiling, but as you zoom in closer, and I'm just going to zoom in really close to an area here in Pittsburgh, you can see this is a georeferenced historical map that aligns with our current day data. They've actually clipped out some of the river features so that you can see the underlying base map layer. And then you could also zoom in on the historical map. And as you get closer, it reveals a higher and higher resolution tile that allows you to actually, and at some point you will zoom in close enough that you aren't able to view the map at that scale. So I'm zooming back out so that we can see this. And Carl, your point about potentially wanting to overlay historical maps and then add features from those, this is the kind of step that you would take to do that. So this map has been scanned digitally, and then that scanned map is georeferenced so that it corresponds spatially to its normal location. And I'm just going to toggle the map display in the table of contents, and you'll see that this is overlaid accurately on the current city of Pittsburgh so that we could view what was historically there in relationship to what is currently there. And I'll just zoom back out a little bit. And so this is a process that allows then a user to present this historical information, allow a user to basically review current versus historical data, and it would also allow a user to create features based on tracing items on the map, like building footprints, roadways, and other area type features that you might want to create features for. And unfortunately, that's a little bit beyond the scope of our session today, but it is something that we could discuss further in a future session if you like. Okay, so we haven't done this recently, but I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out just a bit, and then I'm going to save my map using the Save button. To save that content. And there's a couple other items I want to talk about. First of all, let's say, for instance, I was working in the area of Pittsburgh and I wanted to save a couple of views of my map so that users could easily get to them. And so I'm just going to zoom in to a certain location here. Let's look at this particular property. Looks like a engine house for the railroad, and maybe I want to create an easy bookmark for people to come back to this site. On the toolbar at the top, there's a bookmarks menu. So if I click that, I can add a bookmark, and I'm just going to call this railroad engine house, and hit return to save that. Then I can actually click back on my map, browse to another location. And I'll let that redraw. And then I'm going to add another bookmark. I'm just going to call this place of interest 2, just for the sake of creating that bookmark. And then I'm going to zoom back out and create a bookmark at the Pittsburgh level. And so I'll add a bookmark here and just call it Pittsburgh. And now from any given location in my map, I can use my bookmarks to return to the Pittsburgh extent or the engine house or any of the other points. Now, these bookmarks are very helpful if you are creating a story map, for instance, that you want to use the map that we're creating here in your story map, and you want to use it in several different places and allow, you could use the bookmarks to focus in on different extents for different areas of your story map where you wanted to call out different features in the map. This is good for a tour of an area where you want to highlight different particular locations and call out information about them. So I'm going to zoom to Pittsburgh again and save my map. And then I want to talk about one more thing. I'm going to add the census boundaries again, the tracked variables, so we can talk about this pop-up idea. So if you add or if you access the More Options menu, there's an option here for configuring and removing pop-ups. And so a pop-up, if you just click on items where the pop-up is enabled, I'm just going to click on this layer, and you can see it's pulling up for the census tract that I clicked on. It's pulling up this pop-up window that allows me to access other information. And all of the items that you're seeing in this pop-up window are configurable by the map creator to either show information from the attribute table, either in terms of embedded in a text blurb, or as a table or some other type of chart. And so I'm going to close this window and come back down to my boundaries tract layer, and under the configure pop-up menu, it brings up another window that allows you to configure that pop-up. And so for the pop-ups here, if you click on them, the title of that pop-up window is actually coming from an attribute in the table of information that accompanies this feature layer. The contents are displaying a custom attribute display that can be configured. And if you add that configuration, you can see there are ways to add text that will appear in every pop-up window, but it also includes a variable value that's pulled out of the attribute table. So in this case, according to the American Community Survey, it will appear in every pop-up window, and the value of the total population will be inserted into this level. So if I do that here, this particular census tract has 2,610 people, whereas another census tract has 1,337 people. So these pop-up windows are controlled, or the variables that are shown here are controlled by the attribute table underlying the layer itself. And there are a lot of things that you can control here. First of all, you could configure this in several different ways. The custom attribute display allows you to put that text in, but you could also just list a simple list of field attributes, and that would show the field name and the attribute value of particular fields that you chose. And there are several other ways to do this. You can also add items into the particular menu, or I'm sorry, into the particular pop-up. And in this case, a pop-up media has been added, and that was the columnar chart that we're viewing at in that pop-up. And so you could add other charts as well, or even an image that could be associated with the pop-up that would show perhaps a
Bill, your sound is off. You accidentally muted yourself.
Thank you, Doris. Sorry about that. I have a control for my microphone. Hopefully that didn't happen for too long.
No.
But there are various things that you can configure in the pop-ups, and the document that I sent you guys at the start of the session includes a link to the online documentation that details exactly what you can do with these pop-ups. So I'm just going to cancel the changes that I made and return to my table of contents. And basically, the last thing I need to talk about is sharing your maps. So I'm going to save my map again. And sharing allows you to take a map that you've created and allow other people to view it. If you click on the Share Maps option, right now we need to allow sharing, and excuse me, but I think it's still drawing my options here. Yes, here we go. So this is the common menu that you would normally see. And you can share your map with everybody, which means you could send a link to this map to anyone out in the world, and they would be able to view it. You could also share with only Washington University, so that others that are in our university account would be able to see it, but no one else. And then you can also control this with groups. So if you're working on a project and you wanted to share with a specific group, then you could limit the availability of this map to only members of those groups. So I'm just going to change this so that I can share this map with Washington University in St. Louis, and then I could click and copy this link and send that to anyone in the WashU organization, and they would be able to visualize that map. I could also, if I shared this map with everyone, I would be able to embed this map in a website. And this actually allows you to choose the size of the map that you want to embed in your website. It draws an HTML tagged block of text defining that size and container, and then any options that you define here, you would then basically copy this text and insert it into the HTML that guides the web page that you want to include this map in. I'm going to click back and actually close this. And then the other thing I will state about that is maps that you create and save into your organization or into your ArcGIS Online account are available for you to embed into story maps without having to do this copy and paste option with the sharing. And so that would entail another session on story mapping, which of course we could certainly manage. But we're basically at the end of our time today. I did want to point out at the end of the document, there are several additional resources listed that, and I'm going to pull up my copy of that document now. Can everybody see my Word document?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, so at the end of the Word document, there are several resources. And as I said, this basically guides you through much of the same content that we talked about today. There were a couple of things that I didn't get to cover. But at the end, there are resources, including additional resources for ArcGIS, discussions about ArcGIS story maps, some other story maps that talk about digital methodologies for art historians. There are some web services. We didn't get to cover that today, but there is a section of the document that talks about adding web services, which are normally images that are shared online, very much like the Pittsburgh layer. And then the ArcGIS Online documentation is the one that I wanted to call out. This one actually takes you to ArcGIS Online, the online documentation field, and this page, and these resources have various ways to learn more about ArcGIS Online and various specific tasks that you might want to do. The learning paths actually include a list of online tutorials that you can go through, very much like what we've done today, to move your level of understanding on. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now and get back to the main session and basically open it up for questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I was very interested in that Pittsburgh map, kind of laying over of the kind of historical map. So there are times when a certain historical map does not exactly overlap with the current map. It might be a little bit twisted. It's not only a matter of scale, but it could be a little bit twisted. What are some of the best practices to deal with some of those distortions in historical maps?
Well, and the main issue there is the methodology that's used to basically perform that georeferencing process. Normally what happens is you have a historical map that you scan, and then the key is you identify positions in the historical scan map and then associate those with accurate or present day coordinates. And in many cases, you can take an intersection, for instance, where two streets come together, digitize or click on the intersection in your historical map, and then in a map like ArcGIS Online or a current base map that shows the same streets, you would then associate that with a latitude and longitude value that is pulled off of the current map. This happens in various locations across the map. Best practices 4 corners, but 4 locations that are evenly distributed across the map. The problem with historical maps is that they were developed on paper with sometimes less than accurate mapping practices, so that they're not spatially consistent in their scale and extent. And so you can do that, and it stretches the map linearly to fit those points, but it doesn't necessarily coincide exactly. There are higher level algorithms that morph the map a little bit and take advantage or take into account the idea that it's not an even distribution and a linear stretch. Those require an application that has more functionality than, say, an online georeferencer that's offered through the David Rumsey online mapping collection. So you need a tool like ArcGIS Desktop to actually handle that. And it can account for some of those differences, but the bottom line is each one of your control points is going to be exactly located, but everything else in between is kind of a stretched operation. And so there are ways to try and deal with that, but it doesn't always take care of those minor differences. And so in those cases, I think that you as a researcher would need to identify what's more important. Is it more important to show the location on the historical map, or to show the accurate current location? And if the two don't necessarily coincide very well, you know, you kind of have to make a decision as to where you want that point to be located, because ultimately the point has only one position in space that it can occupy.
Yeah, can I add on to that?
Oh, please.
Because I've done some georeferences of historical images. It also depends on like what's in the image itself, so you can do that particular function. There were times in which there was like a map I was dealing with that had points, like it was a historical map and it had points, but then like the imagery I was like, I can't really, you know, like there's not enough information for me to do it. So I just do the best I can and try to do what Bill says, making sure it's evenly around. But the thing is, it kind of comes to a point of like, you're really guessing. Like if it's like a rural area and it hasn't been developed yet, but then you have a map that's quite, you know, pretty good of the same area, you know, you're still playing mismatch. Like, okay, what points on the map are similar to my image? And it might just not be there just due to the map maker at that time had that on the ground knowledge, you know, but it might not be adding up when you actually see the image. So it's pretty much with historical images and trying to like historical maps, you have to work with what you have and just realize it's going to always be based on what you have, like where the map is at, you know, rural versus urban, and yeah, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and Ali, there is another way you could deal with that. You know, when you're dealing with the entire map, the obviously the distortion might be greater when you try and match up different control points. And so if it's a particular area, like for instance, Carl was talking about digitizing some historical maps of St. Louis, maybe there are some neighborhoods that are of interest, and you could clip that section of the map out and georeference it individually with a higher level of accuracy, and ignore the idea that the whole map is not necessarily of good, a good spatial quality. And so then it would increase the work that you'd be required to handle, but for particular areas of interest, it might be worth it to get a better match between the historic items and the current day extent.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, well, if yeah, did you have a question, Anna?
Oh, sorry, I don't want to keep us if
No worries. I've got some extra time. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask if there are kind of ways people attempt to show change over time using GIS. Like I have a data set where I'm trying to look at, I have a group of like 100 authors, and I'm trying to look at where they published over about 40 years.
Right.
And so are there kind of ways people attempt to do that? Is that related to the story map, or is that right, that you were talking about? Or yeah, I just wondered what
Sure
situation.
Well, there is a time slider function that you can actually use, and it's basically it basically automates the process of filtering your data, and it uses an attribute value that would be associated with like the date that the person was at a location. And so you can enable the time slider on a particular feature layer, and if your feature layer includes several 20 different cities in which the author worked, for instance, and there are different dates associated with each one, the slider would allow the user to basically go to a particular date, and it would only show the features that match that date range. And so you could have a little slop, for lack of a better term, around the date, so it could show several points. And you could also show, if you just moved through the time frame, it could show points turning on and then turning off as the person moved through space. And so that's one way to do it. And that's kind of a dynamic way where the map changes automatically. But with the story map, the story map is basically a web-based, it's basically a web page that is optimized to include maps like we created today. And so you could create a map of, like we did for Pittsburgh, but use different bookmarks for the various time frames that you're trying to show. And so your user could, at the beginning of the story map, you could show them the whole extent of where this author was. And then as you scroll down the map to a new frame, you would show the map at the early locations and only showing those locations. And then you could scroll down to a new frame and it would show later locations, and then finally the final resting place, for instance, of this person. So yeah, you could use the same map without having that dynamic aspect of it. But as you build the story map, when you embed a web map into your story map, you get to control what the extent is and what layers are turned on and off. And so you may have, and even what the filtering is for those layers. So you could, you can very carefully control the expression of a map in the story map in several different ways without having to create different maps to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful. And in the former option, the slider option, would you still have the functionality where you could get the pop-ups? Like if people were interacting with your map, could they still then interact with it if they slid it to a particular year in the way they would if you had those kind of pop-ups?
Yes, I believe that's correct, but I haven't done it myself. Doris, have you done that example?
Just do like the swipe and then have pop-ups?
Yeah, do you know if the pop-ups are active when when you're doing not swipe, but more like a time slider? I think it is. And in fact, I'd be shocked if it's not.
Yeah, I feel like it is.
Yeah, I'm relatively confident, Anna, that you can do that. The the platform has been designed to incorporate all of these bells and whistles and allow them to be used in various ways. So yeah, I'm relatively confident, but I haven't performed that exact example.
That's really exciting. Thank
Okay.
you. This is all really exciting. I'm like, I have all these ideas now, so I'm super grateful.
Well, and one thing I would suggest is the ArcGIS Online documentation site includes some links to examples where people have shared their story maps or shared their actually online maps. And most story maps will actually include some maps that would at least show you some of the potentiality for this environment. And keep in mind, story maps is kind of the entry level of web mapping. And it basically, it's a template for a web page that allows you to pour your own content into it. That being said, many times you will have advanced users who want to do more or who find the template to be restrictive. And so they want to basically expand their horizons, and it is possible to do that, even to the point of actually coding in HTML or JavaScript or other ways to build a much more customized environment and feel. And so, we try to get people started with web maps and story maps, but there is a large gamut or wide range of possibilities there that if you find this platform to be useful but still restrictive, there are ways to go beyond that. So just keep that in mind.
Awesome.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I will close, and I will send a note, Anna, to you and Ali about the link to the Zoom session afterwards so that you guys could use this again if you need to. You already have the document. So if you do have questions moving forward, either myself or Doris are resources that you guys can take advantage of. We are on the data services team at Olin Library, and we regularly offer workshops during the semester. We will certainly this fall be offering story map workshops that would basically show you how to take a web map like the one we created today and embed that in a story map and take advantage of many of the other options therein. So if that is of interest, please keep an eye out. We'll be publicizing those as the semester gets closer